Good evening, everyone. If everyone can please be seated. Okay, thank you. Bruchim Habayim. We are going to start with the Star Spangled Banner and the Hatikva, and it's going to be sung by our very own Arthur Arshin, a congregant of ours. So let's help him out.
Let me know if you can hear me. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? O Lord, Vallev of Penima, Nefesh Yehudi, O Miyah, Vatei Mizrach Kadima, Ayin L'Tzion Sophia. O lo avta tikvateinu, hatikva shenot alpayim, liotam chofshi be'artzeinu, Yeretz Zion Yerushalayim. Liotam chofshi be'artzeinu, Yeretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Didn't Arthur do a great job? Arthur is a congregant. Yeah. Yes. Arthur is a congregant, and he's a lawyer by trade, but I saw the Cantor Search Committee was getting together in the middle of that, so could be you. Great job, thank you. As we start all these events, we start with Hinei Ma'tov U'Manayim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. It's a pleasure to be with everybody here tonight together. And amazing crowd, really unbelievable turnout. So I guess the Lieutenant Colonel is very, very popular. So let's have a hand for all of us for coming. Yep. It's the biggest turnout since we started doing this series, and it almost feels like Yom Kippur. We had people saving seats and all that, except the difference this time is when the service is over, there'll be a great dessert to go to afterwards, courtesy of Magen David Adom. We'll get to that in a minute. To have this kind of turnout, you need a lot of support from a lot of different organizations. We're also proud of some of the work that our congregants do. We have a congregant who's involved in a program called Heart to Heart, which mentors Israeli IDF soldiers. It's a great program. Several of the congregants are involved with that, and the person who leads that is Mr. Oren Gold over there. It's a great program. And Oren was kind enough to send flyers out about the evening tonight, so we thank you for that. And if anyone would like to catch Oren afterwards at the dessert, please do. We also are involved with another organization. It's called P24, and there's a lot of the larger Long Island community is hosting a lot of our brothers and sisters from the kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope that were directly affected on October 7th. They're visiting this very week on Long Island. I know we're having on Friday night a dinner for them. And Kara Goldstein, where are you, Kara? And Melissa, your sister, I know, are involved. Kara, you're too shy. Come on, let everybody see where you are. Yeah. So if anyone wants to find out more about the program, please go to Kara. We have very, very close ties with Solomon Schechter School. And one of its board members, Cameron Osabian, I don't know where he is. You here? Yep, right here. Raise your hand. He helped the turnout, and we have the head of school, a wonderful lady who's touched thousands of Jewish children on Long Island over the last, I don't want to say 40 years because it gives away her age, so the last 10 years. Ofer, are you Okay, want to thank the Dwex for putting this series together, and I mean the Dwex. It's a family affair between Rob, Alyssa, the boys, Benji, and Ali are doing a lot of different things. So it's the whole family is behind it. Also want to thank the committee, Courtney, Michelle, Charlene, Stephanie Abada, Wendy. Barbara, you'll all be glad to know that Magen David Adom is going to have an ambulance out front. So if you got frostbite, registering everyone before, you can just go right in there. They'll be able to help you out. No, but there is an ambulance for guests to come and see and take a tour of later. Also, a few more quick thank yous. CSS, which is our own security force, made of our own congregants, is on patrol tonight. Where's Josh? Josh Frizzell here? Raise your hand, Josh. Anyone interested in joining? Dave is in there. Joe also, but you do not have to be 7'3" to join, right, Josh? You just, yeah. We want to thank the local police with David Sakai and Anthony Lagnato are very much involved with the 2nd Precinct. They're protecting us, and of course, Arrow Security. Special mention is for Magen David Adom. You saw they have a booth out here on the way in. They have a booth at the dessert that they're so generously sponsoring. The rabbi had an idea when he heard about this event that maybe there's an opportunity to work together and work with Magen David Adom. They're a phenomenal organization, and you will learn about them tonight. As I said, there's going to be an ambulance out front. The back of your programs gives you some idea of what they do. The lieutenant colonel will be talking about them as well. Shari Koppelman, who is with MDA, Magen David Adom, and has some of her team here. You just stand up for a second, Shari. You'll have an opportunity to mingle with her and her team, as well as go to the ambulance. And just give me one more second. Shari and her team also came with gifts. So just show you what you can look forward to. There'll be some gifts outside. We have a MATA hat. I want to say I pronounced that correctly. It's a MATA hat. Magen David Adom. I did not say MAGA hat, but there'll be a MATA hat. I think blue and red, or mainly blue, but we have that. And everyone is so excited for the Lieutenant Colonel to be here, and they're very strategic, the MDA team. They knew with 500 people so registered that there could be a lot of traffic in the dessert area. So just in case somebody slips, they also have in their kit some soap, some sanitary soap, and there's also Band-Aids. So if anyone slips at the event, thank you for thinking about that, Shari. But anyway, there's a gift bag that is out by the tables over there, which you'll be able to enjoy during the dessert mingling time. And now I'd like to introduce the showrunner of the event. Actually, before that, I believe the rabbi would like to start off with a bracha.
Okay, there's a certain amount of both excitement at an event like this, and for me, a certain amount of melancholy, because I wish we weren't having this event. I wish it wasn't necessary, or I wish if we were having it, we invited Lieutenant Colonel to come tell us all of the wonderful things going on and how great things are. So before we can begin, we have to take a minute and think about the great privilege we have here as Jews on Long Island, being able to gather in safety, in comfort, and think of those 101 hostages still held to this day, over 400 days later, day in and day out. We don't know where they are. We don't know what's happening to them. And so what I'd like to do, each of you, everyone, I believe, got a piece of paper with all of the hostages, and many of you got a sticker with an individual hostage's name. So we're going to do two things. First, if you have that, hold it up, and we're going to take a picture that we'll be able to share to be able to show our support for the hostages. And the second thing is we're going to have a moment of silence, and then we're going to add one prayer in, and then we're going to begin. So if you've got either the sticker or the paper with the pictures and the names, I hope they went out. Okay, so one person got a sticker. If you have a sticker, hold up the sticker. I'll have a meeting about that later. All right, great. If not, that's perfect. Thank you. If not, just we're going to hold them in our hearts, and I will take them around. Just here we go. Thank you. Thank you. So our congregant who helped organize this event also happened to be in Israel the day of Hirsch's funeral. And after fighting his way through and to get there, and he was one of the last ones there, and one of the heads of the hostage network gave him the flag that was displayed. That's the Israeli flag with the yellow ribbon that is displayed on our seat that we're saving for Omer Nutra, as everyone at this point knows, a Plainview native who we haven't heard from since October 6th. So we're going to take 4 breaths of silence. In that time, we're going to hold them in our hearts. We're going to pray, and we're going to ask ourselves what else we can do, where else we can give to support those people still held hostage. And I'll end with, in Hebrew and English, a short prayer, and then we'll have our speaker tonight. Achenu kol Beit Yisrael, hantunim betzara, uveshivya haomdim bein bayam uvein bayabasha. Hamakom yirachem alehem, v'yotziem mitzara lirvacha, ume'afela leora, umeshibud ligula, hashta bagala v'zman kariv nomar. May the Holy One be merciful to our fellow Jews who wander over sea and land, who suffer oppression and imprisonment. May God soon bring them the relief from distress and deliver them from darkness to light, from subjugation to redemption. And let us say, Amen. We now have the opportunity I'm going to turn it back over to Rami, who's going to call up our speaker.
Rob, I think you have a word. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you for coming, everybody. I'm going to be very quick with this, although it is very important that we thank and acknowledge the Malin family for supporting this series. They have made a commitment to this community that is rather extraordinary, and I think it's reflected in the turnout today, which I know they are thrilled about. I also want to acknowledge the Nancy Friday Foundation, and specifically Richard Sepler, for providing additional funding for these wonderful events. I was going to say a little bit more, but I think all of us are dying to hear the Lieutenant Colonel. So I am going to turn it over to him, just keeping in mind that so many of the, or not so many, the two previous speakers that we had were commenting on what is going on in Israel, and they were phenomenal. This is obviously someone who lives it to the deepest extent. He was a commando in Gaza. He was in the diplomatic corps with the UN in Lebanon. And then he was the global representative for the IDF, as you probably saw, for 4 years, and then he was brought back for October 7th. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Conricus.
Okay, shalom everyone. So thank you, Rabbi, and thank you to Magen David Adom for bringing me here. I'm on a speaking tour with various organizations, but the people who brought me here are Magen David Adom, an organization that I believe in. I think they do tremendous work in Israel. They save lives. My daughter, my oldest daughter, she's a volunteer, used to be a volunteer, now she's on her way to the army, but she used to volunteer for Magen David Adom, and I personally regularly go and contribute blood to that organization that makes its way to the magnificent blood center that we have in Israel.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm tempted to do it without, but we'll do it like this. Thank you. So first, I really would a few moments about Magen David Adom, and I'll start with something sad. You know, I served in the IDF for 24 years. For 24 years, I was extremely proud to wear that uniform every day, whether it was in Israel, overseas, at the UN, representing the IDF in Israel, and of course as an international spokesperson. The only time that I felt anything but pride was sadly after October 7. And I remember walking into a convenience store on my way to my night shift as a spokesperson. This was about 2 or 3 weeks after the war had started, and I was doing night shifts and engaged in information warfare as a spokesperson. And I remember people looking at me, and the looks were different. The looks were not the regular looks that you're used to seeing as a combat soldier and then as an officer in the IDF, where the population in Israel supports and loves and strengthens and is very proud of the IDF, but the looks were different, and that was the first time. And today, I am still proud to serve in the IDF, to have served in the IDF, but there are things that I think we should acknowledge, and one sad thing is that on that day, my organization, we failed. We failed to protect what's most important in the country, our borders and our people. However, Magen David Adom on that day did not fail. They were deployed on the ground. They were very brave. They implemented what Napoleon used to say: when you don't know what to do, you march to the sound of guns. And that is what the brave volunteers and employees of MADA did. They went down south. 14 of the MADA ambulances were destroyed on October 7. Since then, thankfully, all of them have been replenished and more have been provided, thanks to generous donations from around the world, mostly from the US, and that's a lovely thing. But I think that there are organizations that can look back at October 7 and say, we did our share and beyond. And MADA is one of those few organizations in Israel that actually can say that. And I think we all owe, all Israelis and everybody who cares about Israelis owes MADA a tremendous debt of gratitude. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm happy, very happy and proud to be representing MADA and to ask people to support MADA. MADA continues to do good in Israel for everybody. And I tell this to Christians and Muslims that MADA doesn't discriminate. MADA treats everybody fairly and inequality. They're driven by a calling to do good for people and to provide medical services in Israel. And unlike the Red Crescent, that does discriminate, and other medical or quasi-medical organizations, MADA does not discriminate. And I know that there are Muslim and Druze and Arab employees and volunteers in MADA. So beyond being an organization that provides critical services for Israel, it's also a vehicle of bringing Israelis from different backgrounds together, sharing experiences and doing good for their respective communities, which is a double positive. Now, just by a raise of hands, how many Israelis do we have in the room? Okay, thank you. So I ask that because I spoke with a few friends on the way, Israelis. We used to live, when I served at the UN, we used to live in Forest Hills, and we have friends here on Long Island, and I invited them to come. And they said, are you going to tell us all the doom and gloom? Are you going to tell us how horrible the situation is and how long ahead we're going to fight? Some of them, by the way, have soldiers, sons that are fighting in the IDF now. And I said, yes, I am going to share the situation on the ground, and I'm going to share my assessment of where we are now and where the imminent future is going to take us. But there's also a lot to be optimistic about. Had we done this talk 6, 7, 8 months ago, perhaps even 5 months ago, I'm not sure that I would have been able to add the more positive things towards the end. I think that the last 2.5, 3 months have brought in quite a lot of positive things. There are challenges in the coming weeks and months ahead, and for sure in the distant future, but there's quite a lot of achievements on the ground that we are now building on, and hopefully we'll have the wisdom, the strength, and the vision to turn into long-lasting achievements for Israel. But I think that one thing that you all hopefully will take away from this talk is the current complexity, but also leave here hopeful, knowing that yes, it is a long and difficult path ahead, but that we're in the right direction, and thanks to sacrifice, hard work, bravery, and commitment of our troops, we are on the right way and we are going to get out of this. And that's a very important message that I think many people need to hear and need to understand, because if you look at and if you consume a lot of media, Israeli and definitely American or international, that picture isn't necessarily clear. It's more about the negative things and politics and things that aren't really anchored in reality. But are more, they generate more clicks. And I'm here to tell reality on the ground as I understand it and see it, and then, of course, to facilitate a conversation. So let's begin. 403 days of fighting. The Israeli cabinet defined three main goals for the IDF to achieve with regards to Hamas. Number one, dismantle their military capabilities. Number two, dismantle their administrative control over Gaza. And number three, free the hostages. Out of those three, none have been achieved fully. The first goal of dismantling Hamas's military capabilities is very close to being achieved. It's difficult to give you exact numbers, but I would ballpark at around 85–90% across the board of Hamas's military capabilities do no longer exist. Their chain of command, their senior leadership, their storage facilities, their production facilities, rank and file, and mid-level officers, all of that has been degraded very significantly to such a point that there are small pockets left of Hamas capabilities. Currently, we're fighting in northern Gaza, in Jabalia, but the rest of Hamas, as we know it from October 7 and before, does not exist. And unless, if we pull out of Gaza and open the tunnels again, it won't return to ever being what it was before October 7. However, if the battlefield for many months was the military battlefield, fighting on the ground, below ground, looking for hostages and eliminating Hamas, I think it's fair to say that the main center of gravity has now shifted from combat on the ground a little bit more to the diplomatic and international level. Because in terms of military achievements, taking out senior terrorists and taking away their military capabilities, most of that has been achieved. And where we are now is hoping that the Israeli government and our allies will be able to craft an entity or a force or another solution that will be able to go in and implement the second goal, which is to actually dismantle Hamas's hold on Gaza. And to be honest, as long as UNRWA exists in Gaza, and as long as humanitarian aid is provided to Gaza and distributed by either UNRWA or Hamas, Hamas governs Gaza. And for that to change, and for there to be long-term change, substantial long-term change for Israel and for Gazans, that needs to be taken out, and Israel needs to present an alternative. So far, we haven't succeeded in that. There have been different ideas, initiatives. None of them have gotten significant American or regional support. If you ask me where I think this is going and what eventually will happen, the IDF will probably conclude operations in Lebanon. I'll get to that in a second. Free up resources and troops, and then go into Gaza and start conducting the type of tasks that are the least preferred for any military, and that's across the board, Americans, French, British. Nobody likes to do humanitarian operations as a combat army, but that is what the IDF will probably be forced to do. So in order to push Hamas out, and in order to seal the victory, that, I think, is where we will be going. It's a challenging task. It's a resource-intense task. It's a task that has quite a lot of challenges and dangers attached to it, but I don't see any way around it. Hopefully afterwards, Israel, with American support and regional support, will be able to cobble together some type of local and Palestinian force that can go in and start rebuilding the Gaza Strip without Hamas and UNRWA part of it. That is months and years in the making. That is not something that is going to happen fast, and I think we need to be clear about how long the fighting in Gaza is going to continue, and I think we will see continued operations in Gaza by the Israeli military at a low level of intensity. There will be fighting, there will be IEDs, there will be snipers, and there will be clashes, but at a very low and manageable level. That's Gaza. In short, Hamas is down. It's not out yet, but it is probably very much regretting the fact that it attacked Israel on October 7. If we move north, Israeli troops, around 15,000 soldiers, are operating in southern Lebanon as we speak. Imagine a thin strip parallel to the border. The entire border area is about 80 miles. There are no Israeli soldiers that are further into Lebanon than about 5 miles, and most of that strip has already been cleared of Hezbollah infrastructure and personnel. The goal of the current military operations is to take away the most imminent and dangerous threat that Hezbollah posed to Israelis, and that is their ability to invade into Israel. And I'll say something that you may not have heard from any Israeli military or political official, but as horrible as October 7 was, on October 7, we also got a bit lucky. We got lucky in the sense that Hamas jumped the gun, that Yahya Sinwar, for some unknown reason, jumped the gun and decided to launch the attack against Israel. And for another unknown reason, Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon decided not to join the attack and not to launch his troops, his Radwan unit, into Israel. Based on the ammunition, the infrastructure, the weapons, and the facilities that we are uncovering, that we have uncovered in southern Lebanon, had Hezbollah done such a thing, it would have dwarfed what Hamas did by a factor of 10. And that's based on the amount of ammunition and weapons that we are now uncovering in southern Lebanon. The good thing is, we'll never know what the reasons for the decision-making was, because both of the terrorists who made the decisions are not available for comment. Which I think is how every terrorist should end their career. But in seriousness, if we were to look at in order to understand what Hezbollah really were planning and how bad this really could have been, the best indication for me was looking at their tactical maps. When Israeli troops went in and cleared one Hezbollah bunker, they found a tactical map that Hezbollah had prepared, a very good one, that they were supposed to take with them as they were maneuvering into Israel. That map didn't end in the Galilee. It didn't end close to the border. It ends south of Haifa, more than 40 miles from the border. Now, I know as an infantry company commander, I'm not going to walk around with a big bulky map of an area that I don't need. If my assignment is to hit the target 5 miles from here, then I'll have a map that's 7 miles or perhaps 10 miles. I don't need 40 miles. But if my target is going to be very, very far away, well, then I'll need to fold and have a big map with me. That's what Hezbollah had. Their aim wasn't just to go into one community or a few communities along the border. They prepared the equipment, they collected the intelligence, and their combat plan was to go deep into Israel and to do horrible things similar to what Hamas did. And thankfully, that was averted. What the IDF completed today, the IDF just released information, is that it now assesses that 90% of Hezbollah's strategic infrastructure in Beirut, in the Dahya, Hezbollah's headquarters, has been eliminated. Weapons. These are the strategic weapons that Hezbollah spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to develop and to hide underneath the civilian population in Beirut. I'm talking about the manufacturing capabilities of long-range precision missiles, some of the ones that are being fired at Israel today, and all of the most advanced weaponry that the Iranians provided to Hezbollah. And it's many, many years of collecting intelligence. And, by the way, when I look at how Israel dealt with Hamas and how we dealt with Hezbollah, the differences are quite staggering when you compare how long it took us to start operating effectively against Hamas and how hard it was to peel away the layers of commanders and actually target terrorists, and the lasting failure of not getting our hostages back. That, in comparison to how deeply the IDF has penetrated Hezbollah in terms of intelligence, the differences are very big. And for 20 years, the IDF has been collecting intelligence on Hezbollah, on their strategic infrastructure in Lebanon, and specifically in Beirut. And as I said, most of it is now disintegrated, which is a good position to be in. Now, similarly to what I said about Gaza, most of what the cabinet told the IDF to do with regards to Lebanon has been done. So a strip of area parallel to the border now is clear of Hezbollah infrastructure, Hezbollah personnel, and most of anything else. There's not much left there, and the pictures aren't very nice to see, lots of ruined houses. But the houses have been demolished because they were used in order to build infrastructure against Israel. So they're fair game. Currently, lots of talk about some type of a diplomatic deal. Envoy Hochstein is in the area. The French are involved. Unfortunately, there's also Russian involvement in the proceedings. And there are talks of an extended 1701, the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which would, for the first time in history, push Hezbollah north of the Litani River and allow Israel to verify that southern Lebanon is indeed clear of Hezbollah. That's what Israel is demanding. The Lebanese, good traders as they are negotiating, and even though they're not negotiating from a position of strength, and that is currently where we stand. Obviously, the American elections have had a significant impact on events for our benefit, but we'll see how the situation unfolds with Lebanon. Currently, also at the diplomatic and political level, with no obvious path forward, but from a military perspective, almost everything that needed to be done so far against Hezbollah has been done. To keep things into perspective, however, the main objective was to create the conditions on the ground to allow 70,000 Israelis to go back to their homes. The same 70,000 Israelis that were evacuated on the 8th and 9th and 10th of October and have been living scattered in Israel since. Kids starting at other schools, families uprooted, businesses uprooted, parents in different situations and locations, a very difficult experience. And I think that the conditions for them to return home are very near. However, in terms of really solving the problem of taking the military threat called Hezbollah, and taking it off the list, that is not what Israeli operations have been intended to do so far. And I can see a scenario where Israeli decision makers say, okay, we've done a certain part of dealing with Hezbollah, but now we need to do it all, and that would mean a significant escalation. That could happen. I don't think it's very likely, but we have to be honest and say that if the war ends today with a diplomatic agreement, then we still have a serious problem in Lebanon, because Hezbollah still has tens of thousands of rockets, they still have fighters, they still have access to money, and as long as the Iranian regime is around, someone will replenish their bunkers and someone will provide them with money, and we will still have a problem in Israel. And it's important to keep that on the table. Without speaking about the Houthis in Yemen, without speaking about Iranian proxies in Syria, without going into detail about what's happening in Iraq, I'd like to segue to the most important part of the current developments. I think that we are in a historical time where during the last month and a half, I think Israel has crossed a psychological Rubicon. And for the first time, we are changing the security equation in the Middle East, and we are challenging the strategy of our most important enemy. For about 20-25 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran had the availability of funds, the political freedom, and the strategy to wage an indirect war of attrition against Israel, and it did so with very little consequences against it. And sadly, Israel kind of played along with the Iranian strategy. Their strategy was to build a ring of fire of proxy organizations around Israel and to have each organization attack us either independently or together, which is what almost happened on October 7, and to keep us busy in an almost perpetual fight against Palestinian or Lebanese or Syrian or Iraqi or Yemenite terror. The cynical saying is that the Islamic Republic of Iran will fight Israel until the last Arab. And for many years that worked great for Iran. Didn't work very well for us. And what is changing is that for the first time, Israel is reassessing that equation and saying, you know what, that doesn't work for us. And we are now going to take the battle to Iran. And what's been happening since Israel eliminated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, without taking official responsibility for it, but I don't think that anybody thinks that it's Luxembourg that did it. After that happened, that set into motion important events that we are just in the beginning of. And I think that the coming months and years will be dominated by a new Israeli strategy against Iran, hopefully one that will have American and regional support. And the aim of that strategy will be to apply pressure on the Iranian regime and to help the Iranian people rise up against it. And this is a very important moment. Israel is defining a strategy that has military, political, information, and economic components. The military are the more obvious ones that everybody or people see and respond to. But that is what's happening now. And if we go back to where we started, Hamas and Hezbollah, I think it's obvious what we need to do. We are defeating Hamas. They will never be what they were before October 7. We've dealt a heavy, heavy blow to Hezbollah. We haven't defeated them, but they are also not what they were before October 7. They're a very limited amount of what they were. And we have dealt significant blows to each and every Iranian proxy. But if the fighting ends now, and the Iranians still have access to money and the same strategy, they will replenish, and we in Israel will continue to need charity and ambulances from lovely American families because we will be fighting terrorists for the unforeseeable future. And that's not a reality that I want. That's not a reality that's good for Israel. So where this is going, and with this I will conclude, we're at the beginning of what many Americans call the lame duck period, right? From elections to inauguration, where interesting things can happen. On one hand, there is a chance that different parties, it could be Israel, it could be the Iranians, and it could be others, will try to leverage this period in order to set the stage for the incoming administration, either by being requested to do so or by thinking that it's a smart thing. So things could happen in the coming 3.5 months that will be game-changing. On the other hand, and this I actually fear more, is that the Iranians, cunning and smart as they are, will assess the situation, understand that the US elections didn't produce the results that they wanted, but look for a way to turn that into a positive thing for them. And here is a significant risk. The Iranians may de-escalate the situation now, play nicely, go on a charm offensive, and appeal to President-elect Trump's want and desire for a deal. And they may offer such a deal, and it may work nicely with electoral promises, and it may be a deal that will be very, very bad for Israel and for the region, but it will be forced upon Israel because who can say no to Trump? And that's something that concerns me, since the Iranians are cunning and clever. If we see the coming weeks a de-escalation from Iran, my assessment is that that is the calculations that they have made, and that is what they will try to achieve, and that is something that I hope Israel won't allow to happen. Before we continue the conversation with the rabbi, I just want to say a few more things. October 7 for me and for I think many, if not all Israelis, was a tremendous moment of sadness and failure. Many negative things were exposed and horrible suffering. 101 Israeli hostages are still in Hamas captivity. 36 of them are confirmed not alive anymore, and there are serious doubts about the rest, whether they are alive or not. But 36, sadly, we know, and their families have been notified that they're not alive. And that is a almost eternal wound that will be open in Israeli hearts and society and for Jews around the world. But there's also room for optimism. On October 7, wherever I saw institutional failure by organizations in Israel, I saw Israeli society rise up to the challenge and help each other. And I saw an Israeli society that just days before was splintered and busy with nonsense politics, all kinds of ridiculous things, come together, set differences aside, and focus on helping each other. And for weeks, the Israeli government hardly provided answers to civilians, but other civilians did. Volunteers through so many different organizations that really showed ourselves that yes, horrible things have happened, but that there is a silver lining to it, and we continue to see it until this day. Another beautiful thing that happened is related directly to you here, and Rabbi just told me about the initiative of hosting, and it was introduced here, hosting Israelis from the south, which I think is a beautiful initiative and exactly what people need, a bit of respite and away from the tense situation in Israel. What also happened on October the 7th was that many Israelis understood for the first time that they're not alone. They're not alone, that there are many brothers and sisters around the world who care about them, who pray for them, and perhaps most importantly, act for them. And I know that we Israelis don't always say thank you, and we're not always very good with our manners, but I will just want to take this opportunity, and I've been traveling across North America and Europe since January, met so many communities and so many organizations and congregations, and I've repeated this message because I think it is perhaps the most long-term and strategic thing of importance. Israelis have been educated in the level of love and support and action from Jewish communities around the world. And I want to say thank you for your help. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your care. It is something that Israelis, I think, will never, ever forget, not take for granted. And in the dark moments of October 7 and 8 and 9, the light was from Jews around the world who spoke out and acted, and Israelis saw this and understood, and it gave Israelis strength to continue to fight. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for bringing me here, and I want to end on a positive note. I don't know how long it will take, but we will defeat our enemies, and we will chart our way forward to live peacefully and based on strength in our ancestral homeland. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I also want to begin with a thank you. There's a Jewish value of humility, and I find it easy to reach towards sitting next to you. I sometimes am occasionally proud of the work I do and feel like I have done nothing compared to the work you've done. So thank you. 24 years is quite an impressive service. And you dealt with Long Island traffic, so like, way to go. I want to begin with one of the last things you said, which was about the hostages. You mentioned the 101 still present, 37 who have passed. Can you tell us what are prospects we think of possibly finding a way to free them?
Yeah, you go straight for the jugular, as you should, Rabbi. So it's the most painful admission, and unfortunately, you can check and verify what I'm going to say now, because I've been saying it since late January, early February, and I've said it online, and I've said it to communities and on Zoom briefings. With the current situation and the current Hamas disposition, where they believe that holding on to the hostages is their insurance policy and their get-out-of-jail card, I am very pessimistic about our chances of seeing our brothers and sisters home. And it is the saddest thing that I think about. I wish to be totally wrong and mistaken. Up until now, that has not been the case. And if, to be honest, if you would have asked me 4 or 5 months ago, or 8 months ago, how long do you think it'll take Israel to get our hostages back? I definitely wouldn't have thought that I'd be sitting here 403 days after, still with 101 Israeli hostages. And I do not blame the IDF or the government. I think that there's been a lot of political spins that have been inserted into the conversation. The responsibility lies and the blame is Hamas. The fact that they have refused time and again offers made by Israel, made by the US, made by the Egyptians, and made by Qatar, the wretched Qataris. And at the end of the day, they've said no, 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 and no. They've stalled, they have used evasive tactics, and at the end, they don't want to release our hostages. Where I am disappointed is that I do not think that we have prioritized it enough from a military and diplomatic perspective. And it defies my logic and it defies my understanding to have 101 Israeli hostages just a few miles away, and we've been operating there for many, many months, and we still haven't found where all of them are. And that is, I think, there are two things that I think Israeli society will take with it and carry on, and these will be deep infected wounds that will take a lot of time to close, and then there'll be ugly scars. One will be the failure to protect and defend on October 7. How did that happen? How could we have failed so badly and let down our guard and allow these monsters to come across and do what they did to our women and children? And the second is the hostages. And I think it wouldn't be a day too soon for there to be a national board of inquiry and serious investigations in Israel of the military, first and foremost, but of all of the decision makers, current and past, of how did we get to a situation where we so deeply misinterpreted our enemy's strategic intentions and underestimated its capabilities. And I think it is very odd that there still hasn't been a board of inquiry commissioned and serious military investigations of it. And I hope that we will do more, even at the cost of just bringing home Israelis that may be killed in attempted rescue attempts. I think that's better than having Israelis held by Hamas and all of this uncertainty. Last thing, symbolics are important, and when Arabs and jihadis and potential future enemies of Israel look at what's happening in Gaza, they get it. They were jubilant on October 7. They felt all-powerful and that Allah himself had come down and empowered Hamas to do what they did. They don't feel that now. And the way that Gaza looks in Middle Eastern eyes is very, very important, because that is the message that needs to be etched in the minds of current and possible future enemies. You may get away with the surprise attack, but it will cost you so dearly that generations will suffer for your aggression against Israel. And that message is beginning to sink in, and different enemies are beginning to understand it. Super important. I mentioned that because keeping Israeli hostages weakens our achievement, and it strengthens people that may in the future have ideas of doing the same thing. And hence it is of double importance. First and foremost, to get our brothers and sisters back, and second, also from the strategic perspective.
Well, I think we can all wish you were in charge. Thank you for your honesty. We appreciate it. And I didn't think I'd say this, but I also hope you're wrong. I want to go in a totally different direction. We hear often from our own sources that the IDF is the most moral fighting force that has ever existed. I wonder if you could comment on that, and maybe if you have some examples of, if it's true, how that it lives out.
War is a very nasty endeavor. War is ugly, war is brutal, war is horrible, and during war, the ugliest parts of human nature and existence come to the front. So the whole issue of morality in war, it's a bit of there's a strong tension between these two, and therefore when we say that, then immediately people who are of a different opinion bring examples of things that look ugly and violence, use of force, wounded civilians, killed civilians, refugees suffering, etc., 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 and say, well, is this moral? In my mind, and I don't think that anybody can, authoritatively say who is, there's no morality ranking of the world's militaries. What I can say, based on my experience as a combat commander and then as a spokesperson who has seen the processes that the IDF does in terms of targeting, knows how the IDF operates, I do not think that we are perfect. I definitely think that there is room to improve our targeting processes and how we conduct operations. But I think that there is, and this, by the way, I based on listening to British generals and American generals who have seen how we operate. I totally believe, I know that we do so much more than any other military to be the most humane in the battlefield, to kill the least amount of non-combatants, and to think once and twice and three times, and to be creative, not to go for the easy solution of dropping a 2,000 pound bomb on a target, if it can be done differently. And we implement by way of living the principles of proportionality, of distinction. And we care about it because this is who we are as Jews. This is who we are as people who believe in the sanctity of human life. So for me, it's ridiculous to, and I fought this and I will continue to fight it with great conviction that I believe that we are right and that those who criticize us and slander us are wrong. But I believe that in the extremely difficult situation that we are in, where our enemies exactly exploit the presence of their civilians, they use them as human shields, and they force us to fight in the worst conditions. Having said all that, our numbers are still the best in the world. Even if you believe the lying so-called Ministry of Health of Hamas in Gaza, and even if for a second we'll say that 40,000 people have been killed, or 43 they say now, have been killed in Gaza, out of those, more than half are combatants. More than half are Hamas terrorists who fought. Of course, they don't fight in uniform. They fight in sweatpants and sports clothes. Uniforms they wear for parades and for TikTok videos. When they fight and when they're killed in gym shoes and sweatpants. And then they try to claim that they're civilian. But if you compare Israeli numbers to any other military that has fought since Second World War in urban terrain, in an area where there's lots of civilians, no military comes close to the numbers that we have, where there's almost 1-to-1, one combatant to one non-combatant. And it's sad that non-combatants are killed. I feel sorry for Palestinians. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a very interesting story by Ohad Chemo, an Israeli journalist, Channel 12, went into Gaza and interviewed Gazans, and for the first time, you saw Gazans speaking out with rage against Hamas, unafraid to face consequences of what Hamas would do to them, but openly cursing and blaming Hamas for their hardship and their situation, calling them cowards for hiding behind them, the civilians, and saying openly on Israeli TV that Hamas steals their humanitarian aid and that Hamas are cowards who hide behind civilians and abduct their people and torture. And that's kind of a watershed moment. I hope that the women who said these things, that Hamas won't kill and torture and kill them, but at the end of the day, it's becoming clear to others as well that yes, it's sad and civilians have been killed. IDF, I think, has done more than any other military to minimize that horrible side effect of war. And I don't want to, use that old slogan of the most moral, but I think that at the end of the day, Israeli soldiers and commanders can look ourselves in the mirror, knowing that in the horrible conditions that are forced upon us, we do the most humane and Jewish and moral thing that we can. Not perfect, but as close as we can.
For 2,000 years, the Jewish people have waited for a Jewish fighting force to answer just like that. So thank you so much for that leadership. You gave us an update on each of the 7 fronts that we are currently fighting. I wonder if we can go the other direction to our allies. What would you say is the status of the Abraham Accords? Is Saudi normalization? I could talk for a while longer if you need to take a drink. I'm a rabbi, I can talk indefinitely.
A rabbi and a spokesperson sharing a stage.
We'll be here until Thursday. What's the status of these historic accords and potential progress to the rest of the region?
So the Saudis are, I think, engaging in interesting politics. Something that a lot of people don't acknowledge, and I think is very important, when you negotiate, it's so important to understand the position of the person or the entity that you're negotiating with, what they really want, what they really don't want, and where you have flexibility to move around. When I look at the Saudis, and when I assess their military situation and their strategic position and where they want to be in 2030 and 2040, I think that we're in a great position because they cannot have instability and they cannot have a threat against them, and they cannot have Houthis and Iranians aiming and with the capacity to derail their very grandiose economic plans that they're building for the future of the kingdom. Therefore, I think that the chances of Saudi joining in the Abraham Accords and bringing other Arab countries with it are very good. And I think that it will happen. Yes, there are hurdles on the way. There are questions and lack of trust with the current Israeli leadership. And there are issues between Saudi and the US. And of course, the Saudis, what they're doing now is, I interpret it as they're hedging their bets and hedging their situation. They're keeping the Iranians a bit closer, doing some military exercises together and a bit of different messaging. They're using the Chinese as leverage against the US, constantly reminding the US that, hey, if you don't want to have our back, then these guys will surely be eager to. And they use that quite effectively when they allow the Chinese to broker a first and very important rapprochement deal between Iran and Saudi. But at the end of the day, and I think after the last elections, the path forward to expanding the Abraham Accords, of taking the Palestinian issue and right-sizing it when it comes to the strategic picture in the Middle East and the big power play of US, Russia, China, Iran, Israel, and Saudi, I think that the chances for that are good. Of course, there are many people and organizations that can throw a wrench in that machinery, but I think that the chances are good, and I think that I spoke in the beginning about the fact that Israel is going to change its strategy towards Iran and apply pressure on the regime. That is a super important component. If we stop now, and if Iran is seen by the region, and they can continue to fight against Israel, bully their way around the Middle East and bully their way around the world by conducting terrorist activities in Europe and attempting to assassinate an incoming US president and to assassinate dissidents in the US and in Europe, then the message will be a bad one for the region. And I think that Israel is going to change that, and the stronger that we will be against Iran, the higher the chances and the higher our attractiveness for building peace and economic prosperity with neighbors.
Well, thank you so much for your insight and for sharing so many things. In your 24 years of service, you've faced Hamas in Gaza, you've faced Hezbollah in Lebanon, you've faced the UN, and I give you your greatest challenge, Long Island Jews. We're going to do a question and answer now. The Lieutenant Colonel offered to take questions directly as opposed to the cards, so I leave it to you.
So I will just ask you very politely, in typical Israeli fashion, please keep the questions short and with a question mark at the end. And then we'll be able to do more. You choose.
No, you're going to choose.
I'm going to choose?
Yes, I'm not getting involved in that. It's all up to you. Anybody has a question, the Lieutenant Colonel will...
Yes, sir.
Here you go, sir.
Allowing for the fact that Israel is doing what it has to do and that there's a population that is not soldiers and workers that support the armies that we are defeating, what do you say to people who say we are actually creating more terrorists, young people and kids who will grow to be terrorists.
Could you just clarify the last part of the question? Where are we creating them? Who are you
No,
referring
no,
to?
we're not creating them. I'm saying by doing the bombing, and unfortunately, civilians are killed, and I think there's nothing you can do about that. But there are people who say these civilians, or teenagers, or kids, or
Okay.
remaining adults,
Right.
what is Israel's position on them becoming terrorists?
Yeah. So I remember a similar question. I got that in the beginning of the war many times, specifically on CNN and NBC, where they were telling me and like telling the IDF, I mean, you risk creating more, you risk radicalizing more youth, and you risk radicalizing more people in Gaza by going into Gaza, by fighting. It was part of the talking points against Israel for launching the offensive into Gaza after October 7. To which I responded then, and I would say something similar now, is that I'm not sure that they can go much lower than what they did in the run-up to October 7. To do the atrocities that Hamas and ordinary Palestinians did against Israelis, civilians, women, children, elderly, that is the result of a very sick society. A society that is rotten to the core, with values that do not cherish human life, are saturated with hatred, are indoctrinated to hate and dehumanize Jews. Only when you're in such a mindset can you do what Palestinian Gazans did to Israelis on October 7, and did it with full pride, gleefully, and with the intent of doing more and worse, and the only thing that came in their way was the IDF 10 hours too late. I think that I would turn that question around and say, how can we effect positive change for the future? That's the real challenge, because to go any lower than what they've already gone, what Gaza has gone, I don't think that, it's difficult for me to envision what could be worse than doing what they did on October the 7th. Where I think is the real challenge here is how can Israel effect long-term change in Gaza and turn the Gaza Strip from being by far the lowest rung on the socioeconomic ladder in the Arab world before, not related to October 7 or anything related to Israel. If you ask Arabs in the Middle East, give us a hierarchy of preference, Gaza is last. They have always been, in Arab minds, the least educated, the more fundamentalist, the poorest, and the most prone to violence and lowest down on the ladder. So that's the challenge that we face, and that is what Israel now needs to turn around and to build something different. And here, I'm optimistic about many things, but since this task is such a tremendous cultural task, I am not entirely sure that we will have the wisdom and strategic vision to do so. I do not see it in the current Israeli leadership, and it will be very challenging. But what's needed, total reform of their education system. First and foremost, to get UNRWA out of the way, send them packing to somewhere else, and to dismantle UNRWA totally, but specifically in Gaza first, and then to totally revamp their education system, to get involved and control, at least in the beginning, their whole religious system, the mosques and the sermons and the imams, because these two centers of gravity are what created generations of Gazans who only think and dream about jihad, nurtured from a very young age that their goal in life is shuhada, martyrdom, to kill Jews. And that, it sounds as if, maybe people who don't know me, etc., like I'm some extremist person. I'm not. I'm just listening to what Gazans have been saying, what mothers are saying, and having studied their curriculum, and having seen what they eventually did. And if we want to change that, then we have to invest serious effort. Obviously, we cannot do it alone, influencing their education and the religious system, and helping create an economic environment that promotes their prosperity and gives them a vision for the future. Without that, I think that the inertia, the historic inertia of Gaza, will have Gaza return to be Gaza. Poor, uneducated, disenfranchised, and prone to extremism. And it would be in our long-term interest to change that. Coming back to the rabbi's question about Saudi Arabia, there's a good opportunity to turn Gaza into a small test case of Arab investment into Arab improvement, and to give some of the most underdeveloped Arabs in the world a chance to do something better. But for that to happen, Hamas must be totally eradicated, UNRWA must go out, and we must go in and start building something different. And then Palestinians themselves, obviously, will have to make that choice of, we prefer a future of prosperity over a future where we defeat the Jews. And until Palestinians in Gaza and everywhere make that decision and come to an understanding that they cannot have both, they can either do jihad and dream of annihilating Israel, or they can start building their own future and put jihad aside, then that will happen. Yes, young lady.
Thank you. What was the transition like for you from the military to a diplomatic position, and could you explain the importance of a balance between both of these fields in reaching a solution?
That's an interesting question. I have, in hundreds of talks, I haven't gotten that yet, so thank you. In true spokesperson fashion, I will answer the part of the question that I like, and wiggle around the other part. What helped me as a spokesperson in the first month of the war was what you referred to before, having been introduced to the diplomatic world and having experienced firsthand in person the UN, having seen decision-making at the highest global levels, Security Council, and UN reports and many other things. It gave me a lot of understanding and depth as to the importance of military diplomacy and being a spokesperson. So looking back to the years 2014 to 2017, when I was in the UN on behalf of Israel, very meaningful, and even though it was very frustrating, I came home most days and I told my wife how hypocritical and how cowardly so many people are at the UN. They're dressed very nicely and they're polite and they smile in the elevator, but then what they do is many times supporting the worst tyrannical regimes in the world, and doing damage to the only democracy in the Middle East, which is Israel. And it was frustrating, but I learned a lot, and I think that diplomacy helped me do what I did afterwards. But then on the other hand, there's nothing like being on the ground and having experienced something close to what it is that we're talking about now. And to be a military spokesperson, it was very useful to first have fought on the ground in Lebanon and in Gaza, and to have some kind of relevance to the topic, which I think is relatable and very important. Yes, sir. Just behind, yeah.
For those looking for the most relevant, first, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
For those looking for the most relevant, comprehensive, and up-to-date news on everything that's going on in Israel, where would you recommend that we get our news?
Which is a super important question, because knowledge is power, and in order to be able to fight, in order to be able to defend ourselves, our values, and our communities against anti-Semitic attacks and slang, nothing is more important than being informed. So I would actually I could say a few media sites. I think that there are a few English-speaking Israeli sites that are credible, good, fast, up-to-date, and deliver relevant information. Times of Israel and I-24 are good sources with journalists on the ground, relatively little political and so-called editorial bias, and good reporting. I think it's very important to get the deeper non-journalistic information. There are a few good sources of that. The organization where I work, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, is an American think tank. Even though think tank many times are, these stuffy locations with academics who sit and talk theory, FDD is very different. FDD does daily reports and sit-reps, situation reports, about around 10 per day, analyzing events and putting them into an American foreign policy and security context, which is very important, I think, for Americans, and they provide what's relevant for people who care about freedom, democracy, and Israel, but from an American point of view. So I would definitely recommend that. I think Stand With Us provides good information specifically related to the more polemic and debatable questions, Israel's right to exist, the history of Zionism, and things like that, which many times, for instance, young people in universities, they're confronted by people who throw Hamas or Iranian or Russian propaganda at them, and sometimes they don't know what to answer. And Stand With Us has a lot of information that provides tools, data, information, and interpretation and talking points which are relevant. Mailing lists, if you support AIPAC, they have excellent information at the higher strategic level, also guidance on what can be done and how to engage your elected officials. There's never an audience or an opportunity where I won't mention the tremendous work that AIPAC does, and if anybody here in the room is a supporter, thank you. AIPAC does tremendous strategic work, saving lives of Israelis through air defense and military cooperation and political power, super important. So those are the three I could go on, but I think those are different boxes that you could explore and find lots of useful information. Prager University, even though it's not up to date like happening now, but lots of good content about Zionism, Jewish history, Islam, extremism, jihadism, anti-Semitism on YouTube and their website, very good as well. In the back, the lady standing.
Velkommen tilbake i Long Island. Takk så mye for I kveld. I'll ask my question in English. Jeg en svensk-amerikansk jude.
Takk.
I'm wondering, as far as diplomatic...
So for those who didn't understand what the Muppeteers just were saying, the Muppets just were saying,
I was
thank
just
you.
saying, welcome back to Long Island, and
Thank you.
And thank you for tonight, and I'm a Swedish-American Jew. I'm wondering, diplomatically, the difference between the Nordic countries and how they're responding to the support with their support of Israel and of what's going on. I know it's very heartbreaking for me to watch what's happening in the Nordic countries, specifically the Scandinavian countries. And I would just be curious, I've watched you many times on Swedish TV, but I'm curious of your response of how if there's a difference, because they're not a monolith, if there's a difference between, particularly Denmark, Norway, and Sweden.
Yeah. So I think that people in Long Island and most places in the US would be wise, Jews here in America would be wise to watch with great attention and fear the story of Jewish communities in Northern Europe, specifically in Sweden. I was born in Jerusalem, but I grew up in Malmo. Many people, when I say Malmo, they say, oh, very bad, Muslims and Islamists and Jews being persecuted, which is really the situation. And I think that Malmo and Sweden and many European countries, we can add probably the Netherlands to that list and maybe also France today, they tell American and Canadian Jews a cautionary tale of what happens when Jews do not have political organization, money, political leadership and power, and the willingness to use that power in order to defend themselves, their communities, their values, and their very basic protection. It hurts me to say, but the community where I grew up until the age of 13, until we did Aliyah to Israel, the Jewish community in Malmo is dead. It has no future. There are Holocaust survivors who are still around, and there are people in their late 60s and 70s. All of the young have either intermarried or left. Left because they couldn't find Jewish spouses, left because they were threatened, left because they felt that there wasn't a future, and they went to London or to Israel and maybe to a few other places, or to Stockholm, the biggest city in Sweden. And that's a very sad story, and I see symptoms in many other places. U.S. Jewish communities are nowhere near that yet, but I think it's very important to see how bad it can go if you don't remain vigilant, and if you let down your guard, and if you allow the other side, whoever it is, Christian anti-Semites and neo-Nazis, or jihadists, or whatever the villain of the day is, the important thing is not to stop fighting and to be organized and to have political power and to use it. And there are many beautiful examples in the US of Jews doing exactly that, which I commend, which is super important, and you should continue to do that. But there are stories that are very worrying, where I see North American communities that are under distress. And anti-Semitism is in many places rampant, amplified by social media, amplified by many other things, and sometimes the problem is smaller than what it seems in social media. But I think that it's very important to study that situation and not to go where those countries have gone and where those Jewish communities have gone, because it's a very bad place and it shouldn't happen to your beautiful communities here. So I didn't directly answer your question, but yes, sir.
As someone who's served in so many capacities in the Israeli military, how do you look at the struggle over the drafting of Haredim that's currently going on, and the implications, if any, for morale and readiness in the military? I was just wondering about your views on that.
So in interviews, many interviews either start with, or throughout the interviews, the person who asks me questions will bring in some crazy thing that Bibi said, or Smotrich, or Ben Gvir, and quote however that is reflected in American media, and that's the starting point for assessing the situation, which is a very obvious way of trying to paint Israel black. And usually 99.9 times I will work around that and speak about what I want to speak about, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Iranians, Hezbollah, and explain the situation from our perspective and not put the blame on Israel, which is what most people do. I try to stay away from Israeli politics in international media, because I think that there are so many other people who do that very well with great passion, and I'm being cynical. However, I will say this. The first time that I officially addressed this topic, addressed Israeli politics, was when Gallant was fired. I personally think I was extremely, extremely disappointed and saddened by it. I see it to be a petty, reckless political move, motivated not by what's good for Israel, but by narrow and unkosher political considerations, pun intended. And I think it's very regrettable that that was made. I think it's a decision that should not have been taken by the Prime Minister when we are at war, to relieve from duty a person who is very qualified to do the job and has been doing it very, very well, putting country first and politics second, that's Yoav Gallant, and replacing him during the war with the person who is not qualified to be Minister of Defense, who does not have the military credentials or the security credentials or the experience or the leadership. And I could go on, but I won't because people may be recording. And I'll just say the things that are very obvious and I think beyond debate. And I think that's a very bad thing. And I speak about that because the motivation for that decision was in order to legalize the exemption from duty of Haredim in Israel. And as someone who has 4 kids, whom my wife and I educate to do meaningful combat service in the IDF, and to serve their country, to be good citizens, proud Zionists, and to pull their fair share, and if possible more, of the beautiful thing that we have, and to contribute, I am very much disturbed by it. And I think that doing what the Prime Minister did, very, very dangerous, can have long-term negative effects on Israeli society. There are reports now that are out. I take them with a grain of salt because I think that they are motivated by people in Israeli media who have a very certain political mindset. But nevertheless, it's very difficult to educate my children that you will go and risk your life and eat shit for 3 years and serve your country while others don't, just because they've manipulated the political system. And I think that American Jewish communities provide a beautiful example of being super observant and being Talmidim Gdolim and Chachamim B'Torah and devoting their life and energy to studying Torah and Jewish culture and still working and providing for themselves and not living off benefits. And I think that's an example that we should have in Israel as well. Nobody should be exempt, nobody should live on stipends, and nobody should be exempt from military or civil duty. And it's an issue that has plagued Israeli politics for, I'd say, 25, 30 years. I think 5 different Israeli governments have fallen because of this topic and an unwillingness and lack of leadership of Israeli leaders to say, no, this is wrong, and if it means even my political future, I will forfeit and risk my political future because I know that this is what Israel needs. And this is what we need to do in order to change the course. We've devoted all of the talk here to our enemies and Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and Jihad and whatever. Yes, there are many. Yes, they are powerful. Yes, they are very devoted to killing Jews and they don't want us to live in our ancestral homeland. But I fear them far less than I fear internal strife in Israeli society. And I think that if anything will be our undoing, it is topics like that, which erode the social cohesion of the State of Israel. And it doesn't make social sense, it doesn't make economic sense, it doesn't make military sense. Like everything in life, it's not a quick fix. And it's not something that we can do like this and draft 20,000 young Haredim. No, that won't work. It needs to be done through education. It needs to be done gradually. It needs to be done with compassion and understanding that this is a major shift for people who live in a different reality, and they need to be brought into the fold, lovingly, not negatively, and bring them in and help them join and become productive parts of Israeli society. Now, if you ask the military, if you ask the chief of staff before October 7, does the military want that hot potato of, Haredim in the military? Well, no, thank you, because it's a tremendous kav rosh, right? It's taking people that have very little to do with, military background and then trying to turn them into soldiers. The IDF is busy with so many missions that are real life and death, and having to do this as well, not what the IDF wants. And hence the IDF itself is dragging its feet in actually implementing Israeli law. By the way, Israel is currently, the Israeli government and the Ministry of Defense and the IDF are in violation of Israeli law. Israeli law says that all of the Haredim need to be enlisted, and that the summons need to be sent out, and the Israeli government is violating Israeli law. But never mind law. What's more important is the future of the state of Israel and where we go as a society. And I hope, pray for that Israeli leadership to do that and to put state first and politics second. And I'm hopeful that it will happen, and I'm hopeful, and I've seen lots of Haredim, that young men who actually say, well, I want to be part of society. I want to be part of this success story that is the state of Israel. I want to elevate my living standards. I want to earn an honorable living, not by working manual labor for low-wage jobs, but for harnessing my potential. And of course, so many of them, like the rest of Israeli society, are super talented, hardworking, and can do great things. So there's a lot of positives and a lot of potential for the future. Hopefully, our leadership will guide us the way through.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, this was a phenomenal evening. We've still got more. We have a dessert and coffee reception in this room. Jonathan is going to, Lieutenant Colonel is going to join us.
Jonathan, that's fine.
You can ask him questions there. I'm sure he would take some pictures as well.
Of course.
That would be great. And the rabbi just has a final thing to say.
Just, I think in three. So three quick things. First, on my bingo card of what might happen tonight, I didn't have a question asked in Swedish and the lieutenant colonel saying the phrase, forget about Israeli law. Second, when we look forward to how do we as Jews move forward? What does it look like? I think we can all say we can look to leaders like you, to thinkers like you, to people who have put both your life and your living on the line to make the Jewish people have a brighter tomorrow. We can say both thank you and have hope for a better tomorrow. And then lastly, for anyone who would like, in that corner over there, so opposite from the dessert, we'll have a Mariv minyan. So anyone who either needs to say Kaddish or would like to daven, come join me over there. Let's thank very much Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Do you want to get him over there first? Yeah. Okay, great. Get him over.
Thank you. Great conversation.